ZoomerLife. Health, wellness, and longevity from the world's brightest minds.
Okay, moving right along. Remember that retiree who was supposed to slink off into a corner and become invisible? That guy, that woman? Well, Donna Sinclair says that elders are people who can no longer get fired, and therefore they can and they should say the things that need to be said, whether or not it's comfortable to do so. Donna Sinclair.
Well, my main preoccupation these days is figuring out how to be a good elder. So being a writer, I just sat down and wrote a book about it because nothing concentrates the mind more than looking at a blank white page morning after morning. And after I had done that for quite a while, I ended up with this book, which is 365 little readings about not aged people and not old folks and not geezers and not seniors and not even Zoomers, but elders. People who have had life experience and reflected on it and tried to find some wisdom in it. So this is a rather daunting task to hand out a book with a subtitle that says An Elder Woman's Book of Wisdom. And I felt a little arrogant and didn't quite know how to deal with that until the day that my 5-year-old grandson came to me and took my face in both of his hands and looked into my eyes lovingly and said, "Nana, how long is it from kid to wrinkly?" And I thought, it's a really long time. So out of that long time, I think that probably I figured out some things to say. And the first thing that I think is, or one thing at least, that I think is important when it comes to being a good elder is that we make peace with our mothers. Because in that very complicated relationship, in the working out of that complicated relationship between mothers and children, and particularly their daughters, there is a great deal to be learned. So I'm going to read you a little bit about that. All these readings have a date attached to them, and I keep calling them passages, which makes me feel as if I'm reading scripture, but I'm not really. This is the reading for January 7th. This is the day my mother died. She was 96, a strong, talented woman who cherished her children and adored her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She was also often irritable in her later years, sparking similar irritation in me that I did my best to conceal. Now I have work to do. I need to figure out why we were the way we were. I need to make peace with her. In my late 60s, I should be well beyond blaming her for any part of the way I am, but I do. As a toddler, my mother had traveled with my grandmother from Vancouver to Northern Ontario. At age 9, she saw the Great Fire of 1922, devouring houses one by one down their street, stopped by a wind shift before it reached them. After she married, she and my father lived in a small log cabin with a wood stove. My mother deeply missed electricity and indoor plumbing. She once threw a naphtha gas-powered iron through the window, convinced of an imminent explosion. They soon moved to a more comfortable setting where they lovingly raised my brother and me. And when my father died, my mother moved to be close to me. She was welcomed at our friends' homes as a treasured elder for the next 23 years. She grew more difficult with me. Perhaps I was one with whom she was able to be cranky, one she trusted would not desert her. Perhaps it was advancing blindness or discomfort. I struggled to remember when this wasn't so. Now my work is to understand. This is my chance to learn her strength and love, and as much as I can, avoid passing on her pain. And of course, that leads you to the subject of children. I remember this. My children were the saving grace between my mother and me. They visited her, teased her, loved her, and were serenely aware of the pain I felt over the crankiness she and I seemed to create in each other. I would like to avoid my mother's desire to perfect her children, especially her daughter, long after the point where that might have been understandable. Surely we can give up perfecting our children once they are able to think in an adult way. Surely we should never try to perfect our children. Perfection is a vastly overrated state of being. The other thing I learned from watching my mother age was what an issue for us as elders is productivity. How much it means to us to be productive. This is for May the 11th. When my mother moved, resisting, into an assisted living residence, she was already 91 and blind. A staff member asked me what she had enjoyed doing before she lost her sight, and I described her knitting. She was a wonderful knitter. So I brought in needles and wool, and the day after I did that, I found my mother knitting a scarf. Her first effort was an alarming length of pale blue wool full of holes. It was 6 inches wide in some places and 12 in others. It was for me. I have it still. When I was annoyed with her, I would refuse to wear it. She couldn't tell, and it made me feel childishly better. She did scarves for her son-in-law and scarves for her grandchildren, and soon, miraculously, her knitting became more accomplished. There were fewer holes, and the edges were even. Before she could get bored, her fashionista granddaughter suggested more color and sufficient length to wrap around the neck several times and still hang down. I was sent more frequently in search of wool, and soon my friends and the friends of friends, a whole Facebook of warmly wrapped individuals, sported very long, multi-striped scarves. We resembled aged university students who had no idea what our college colors really were. And my mother was happy. She was productive again, even if she couldn't see her finished work. She knit and knit, until at 94 her hands gave out and she couldn't hold the needles anymore. It took another year, but that's when my mother, the elder who knit to keep her loved ones warm, began to die from lack of usefulness. So I wouldn't want you to think, though, that it's only our biological mother that we learn from and that we have to be reconciled with. This one's for January 16th. This is what I believe. We live in a holy earth, created with just the right amounts of oxygen and carbon, water and heat to grow the food we need. Just as a baby thrives in its mother's womb, so we live in the womb of Mother Earth, utterly dependent on her for all our needs. And she is in trouble. I recently picked up Bill McKibben's book, Earth, Making Life on a Tough New Planet. The Earth as we knew it is gone, he says. The hydrological cycle in North America, for one example, has already changed so that in some areas we get terrible drought, and in others, devastating floods. The womb we have lived in for all of human civilization has become less than friendly. We may, McKibben says, this is a quote, with commitment and luck, yet be able to maintain a planet that will sustain some kind of civilization, but it won't be the same planet, and hence it can't be the same civilization. End of quote. Elders need, therefore, to tell stories. This is the way it was, we must say to our beloved young, who cannot remember the sea abundant and the forests endless, dark and rich. Our memory of Earth's nourishing womb must be retained so that we can live in her someday again. So the other thing, I think that one of the other things, elders do many things, but one of the other things that's important for us to do, because we are so aware of the passage of time, is we need to create beauty. And we do that in many ways. Some people write poetry, and some people save parks, and some people make pots, and some people garden. I'm a gardener. So this is for May 21st. It's important that you note what month this is written for, May 21st. The maple is dropping tiny red blooms on the deck, and the tulips are opening too fast. The shady side yard is a sea of white trilliums, and I panic slightly whenever I walk through it. Do not pick the provincial flower, big fine, maybe jail or beheading. Every Ontario child learns this in school. The forget-me-nots are a blue haze. The yard is littered with pots and rakes and bicycles, the contents of the shed, which is getting new walls. And I am trying to hide the mess because this yellow mist of daffodils and leopard's bane and marsh marigolds lasts for only 1 minute. And then the meadow rue and the Shasta daisies will be out instead, and I will have missed the sweet woodruff, missed it completely. I cannot keep up with all this beauty. It is spring in the north, the blurry 100 shades of green month of May, before the black flies and mosquitoes come to tell us how we pay for Eden. No matter. Charge what you like for paradise, I say to God who made all this. Only slow down time. So I think the other thing, one of the many other things that elders do is we try to mend the world. In fact, that's a summary, perhaps, of all the many ways I'd like to tell you what we do. We try to mend the world. And that's the phrase, as many of you will know, of a 2nd century rabbi, Rabbi Tarfon, who said that we are not, neither are we able to evade this task, nor are we obliged to complete it. We are not to evade the task, but we are not obliged to complete it. So we mend the world. I think that's what Moses was talking about. Sometimes that means speaking out. Sometimes it's very local, though. So I'm going to read you one of the more local ways that we mend the world with any child that we happen to find close by, sometimes grandchildren, perhaps not. It's called berry picking. It's April. There's no berries in April. I'm not quite sure why I put it here, but anyway. We took Eli to Manitoulin Island, and we set out for a walk along the gravel road. There were butterflies and buttercups and Joe Pyeweed growing in the ditches. I want to go to a museum, said our little grandson. His life has been spent in cities. So we showed him how to tell if someone likes butter. Hold a buttercup under the chin and peer carefully for the yellow reflection, and how to make daisy chains. We found bees gathering pollen in a groundhog hole and ducks gathering on the bay. We jumped from rock to rock, pretending all else was ocean filled with sharks. We found raspberries growing by the side of the road, and we ate them from our hands. Soon he had utterly forgotten about museums. But we were just in time. Children need nature, unmediated by parks, glorious and necessary, though the latter may be. Children need berry picking. My father picked blueberries and expected us all to help. We did. My mother made sweet blue syrup studded with berries, which we ate all winter with toast or pancakes. She made pies. We understood from this that the land will feed us, that despite flies and bee stings and winter cold, the land loves us dearly. Our grandchildren need to know this too. I have one more thing I'd like to read, and I have to kind of set it up for you, I found the letters of a whistleblower in archives at the University of Toronto when I was researching a book there. And it's kind of proof of the fact that mending the world is sometimes a failure. Like, we don't always succeed. And in this case, they were the letters of a young woman who was teaching in one of the Indian residential schools. This was in 1929. And you will recall, perhaps, that the residential schools, which were run by the federal government and the 4 mainline churches, profoundly damaged 3 generations of First Nations children. And the young woman who was teaching there had things to say about it. And she tried to say those things. So I'll just read to you about this. This is my last reading. In 1929, Lucy Affleck was a young teacher at the United Church's Round Lake Residential School for Native Children in Stockholm, Saskatchewan. She had been there for only 2 months when she wrote an impassioned letter to the church's superintendent of Indian missions. The children lacked completely the mothering that only one could give them who lived close enough to them to know their individual dispositions, she said. The discipline they are receiving is not the result of training or the rule of love. In a group in which tuberculosis is rampant, there was still no heat in October, and they are still wearing their summer clothing, the boys without underwear of any kind. There is no care to prevent serious colds. Bathtubs don't work, and the boys have to bathe in laundry tubs, and toilets don't flush, and, this is a quote, sweeping in the boys' dormitory, you will know what a dust an unoiled floor makes, is done 7 days in the week by 4 girls, 3 of whom are from families with bad TB records. What really upset Lucy was that the prayers they learned were meaningless. All the religious knowledge these little Indians get is a matter of form only, of a gospel of love and light, these are still Lucy's words, of a gospel of love and light. They hear nothing. She described the poor food, the overcrowding, the principal selling apples to the children when he knew they had money from their parents. She sent off her letter. A few weeks later, she was called to the principal, who said, "Your check is there on the desk. The truck will take you to Whitewood tomorrow." She asked if there was any explanation. None, except the church demands the immediate dismissal of anyone disloyal to the staff. In nothing that I have said or done have I been disloyal to the children or the school, Lucy said. I reported only conditions that should not exist and reported them to the proper authorities. You may take either a morning or an afternoon train, he said. Lucy lost her job in the Depression. She was not yet 30. We who are retired and have no job to lose have no reason to keep silent when we see conditions that should not exist. Thank you. What's that?
Thank you, Donna. That was a nice way to end.
Thank you.